Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice follows the long and often respected lineage of Souls-like games that have come before it, and the challenge was to provide a great gameplay experience to fans of From Software and to separate itself into something truly unique. The word Souls-like has been adopted by the industry to describe many an action role-playing game that follows similar principles of the Souls franchise. These games often are an oasis from the concessions of easier games. Frankly though, the term has been used to death, and nearly any game that's hard is compared to Souls for some reason. If not the crippling difficulty, it's a mute undead hero or replenishing potions, and a maze of interwoven levels set upon the backdrop of a cryptic story that makes no fucking sense. If you haven't played Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, what might surprise you is that this is not a Soulsborne game. It's not the spiritual successor many believe it to be, nor is it an evolution of the Souls game, as said by series creator Hidetaka Miyazaki-san. It's a new game in a new universe, he goes on to say, and that's incredible. Not often do we get to see a niche single-player game come to the market, especially by a renowned developer who ventured into uncharted waters. They could have easily made Dark Souls 4 and rode with that. They could have also created Ninja Souls by slapping a shinobi paint job over the existing combat system and blueprint for Dark Souls 3, which was heading in a direction that favored a more structured, linear format. It would have been the reasonable thing to do, especially with Activision at the helm, a company notorious for milking its franchises to death without much change. In the most elementary sense, it's this idea of holding developers hostage to what already works. Most of this ethos boils down to companies wanting a safe haven for profit generation, as today the industry is much more competitive and gamers seem to play fewer games for much longer, as opposed to playing lots of games for small periods of time. So in essence, publishers have the incentive to churn out what worked in the first place. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice treads what I can only describe as the perfect line of familiar versus new. This epic shinobi tale retains the fundamentals of the Soulsborne games enough to please vets, yet overhauls each outlet for its game design, from the combat, the traversal mechanics, and how players interact with the game's narrative elements. It's amazing that it feels like a brand new game removed from the Souls universe, yet still retains the two things that define what makes Souls so iconic: the punishing yet rewarding play curve, and the intensely nail-biting combat. What the game does, essentially, is present a total package that harkens back to the lifeblood of the Soulsborne games, without actually being one, and I think that's something truly amazing. The second you begin the game, something immediately becomes apparent. This game isn't as ambiguous as what came before it. There's actual backstory here, not just smidgets of lore that require players to figure out what the game is all about. There's sensible dialogue that's not made to be confusing, and NPCs tell you what to do, the world's got purpose, there's a narrative arc. Soulsborne games of the past notoriously obfuscate these kinds of things, as they relish in being deviously enigmatic. I imagine the developers love this aspect to making those Soulsborne games, allowing them to hide all sorts of things in the cracks and crevices of the world, and sometimes between the lines. Just enough to encourage players to venture off the beaten path, which is often a scary proposition if one wants to stay alive or find the next bonfire in one piece. There's not much to the Wanderer Shinobi in this game, but much more than any other character in any other Soulsborne games, not the least of which his ability to speak to people and inquire what's going on. The world, as well, is much different. The mythology of ancient Japan is here embroiled in the cutscenes, the people, the story, the atmosphere. Much more is given to you, and it offers, sometimes, more insight than other Soulsborne worlds that have mightier purposes, often obscured from learned, nor translated to players very well. But in Sekiro, things are easier to follow, and the opening cutscene provides a nice kickstart to what's going on. Overall, the game works much harder at giving information, aid, directions, and purpose to players this time around. That might be a black mark for die-hard Souls fans, but that's the point here. This isn't a Soulsborne game. Walking around, it's easy to see the influences of Dark Souls and Bloodborne, but the beauty is that the developers have taken leaps and bounds to make this game unique. For starters, stealth in Sekiro awards the player a much-needed tactical edge and sense of freedom for multiple reasons. One is that players now have the ability to circumvent challenge that they feel may be too hard, they may come back to, or is unnecessary, such as when running back to a boss area. Stealth completely changes the Souls-like experience, as players have more options now to move through the world freely without having to rely on just dodging enemies. Sometimes it's easier to assassinate just a few enemies to clear a path and then sneak by undetected to get to where you need to go. An actual stealth system really changes the game, not the least of which solves a huge issue, at least somewhat, of players getting stuck in areas. In Sekiro, stealth presents a choice. If you're having a hard time, you can take a few extra minutes to engage in stealthy kills to make sure the area is much easier to navigate. What this does is allow you to thin out the ranks of the battlefield before going in for the eventual kill. Never before in a Souls-like game have you been able to outright avoid enemies by using stealth, or to tip the scale in your favor like this. Outside of body pulling, using magic, or using a bow to pick the fights you wanted, this system is both entirely new, exciting, and game-changing. Prior Souls games had rigid enemy placements and mild patrols in a game like Bloodborne, and if you pulled them, they'd essentially chase you forever. Another mechanic Sekiro introduces to help players is enemy resetting. If players engage in combat and they run away, enemies will retreat to where they were, sometimes walking back. Sometimes you can even backstab them on the way back to their post. So when you combine the crouch and stealth system with this new AI, it makes for a game that provides more options for the player, which has a direct impact on replayability. Replayability has been somewhat of a new issue rising up with the most recent Souls games, as large sections were inherently linear. Sekiro fits a different mold, allowing much freedom to the player by way of environmental design, stealth mechanics, and the Grapple Hook. The most iconic ability in Sekiro would obviously be the Grapple Hook, which opens up even more freedom to the player. To be clear, it's freedom with restriction though. The grapple can only be used when the player is in range of a hook, which are placed bountifully around the map. I imagine many players were hopeful of a free-form grapple that could be used anywhere, but the challenge of that sort of implementation would have had far-reaching consequences, and far too much challenge for cohesive level design. Instead, the grapple works as a stationary slingshot mechanic. The grapple is a great new tool that changes the way players move through levels and explore them for optional treasures. Shiny things are hidden in the deepest corners of the map, only accessible by those who take a leap of faith to reach some of the game's more precarious hooks. The hook is also useful in combat, acting as sort of a repositioning mechanic. During combat, players will often want to use it as kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card when they're cornered, bolting up to the sky in the seconds that would have otherwise been their death. So while there is quite a lot of functionality built in with the grapple in terms of combat, for the purposes of exploration itself, it is dependent if you're in range or not of a hook. Though other implications do surface from the hook, much to the interest of any Souls player. One is the ability to speedrun the game and quickly get to bosses and important gear by using hooks. It's possible for players to bypass large areas of the map should they get familiar with hook placements, and you could even get to some of the bosses in less than 15 seconds from the closest idol, Sekiro's form of a bonfire. This item transforms the game into a system of both vertical and horizontal exploration, the former being infamously lacking in some Souls games outside of simply going down a flight of stairs. Combining the cohesive level design with both the stealth mechanic, the grapple hook, and the ability to jump, slide, and backstab easier, and it's easy to see how the fundamentals of Sekiro have shifted far beyond what was offered in From Software's other titles. I could go on and on about what Sekiro changes or tweaks to make it stand on its own, away from the preconceptions of what a Souls-born game is supposed to be. From the combat, which now relies on posture, control, and savagery, to ditching RPG elements like stats in favor of more streamlined customization. Gone is character creation and predefined tropes. And gone is this idea that every boss should be a giant knight, wielding a giant weapon with a 3-hit swiping combo and an overhead attack that tracks the player. The game respects those traditions at times, but otherwise carves out its own niche in its own unique way. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice has kicked my ass for I don't know how many days now, and I'm not gonna lie, it's a very difficult game, but I never wanted to quit. The game puts you in sort of a trance-like state, and you want to keep pushing on in face of even the most persistent opposition, and that is a sign of a great title from Software. It slaps you on the ass when you get too complacent or brazen, yet rewards you for treading that line without crossing it. This is the essence of any From Software game, this idea that players should be punished by the game when they do something stupid or overly risky, yet rewarded when they could take it to that point and back off. It remains notoriously difficult throughout its long playthrough and will stand out as one of the most punishing yet rewarding games From Software has ever put out. It's familiar, yet new at the same time. It's not simply another Soulsborne game, but it still captures the magic of what those games are. And that is why Sekiro did something truly amazing.